Good morning and Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us once again. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein at Valley Beth Shalom, joined by my dear friend Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the American Jewish University, and this is VBS Torah study for a Shabbos morning. We're preparing for the high holidays. In fact, this evening is the Slichot service, the wonderful preparation service that Ashkenazic Jews begin a week or so before the holiday. It begins this evening at the end of Shabbat. Here at VBS, we're beginning at around 7:30. But wherever synagogue you're in, it's an evening of reflection, of prayer, getting back into the mood of the holiday. I know it's going to be a little difficult because it's so early in the year. The sun is still shining and it's still sort of summertime outside. But you can begin to feel the beginning of a shift in the seasons and a change in our attitudes. And we're thinking today about Slichot, about Tshuva. Tshuva is that remarkable idea created by our tradition that we are not stuck. We are not stuck in the ruts. We are not stuck in the patterns. We're not stuck in the inertia of the life we're living. We have the power to turn, to change, to choose a different way. The great Maimonides offers us the idea that no one's life is predetermined, that each of us is in fact the collection of the choices, the accumulation of decisions and choices that we make in the course of our lives. And therefore, we're always invited, we always have the freedom to make different choices, to turn in different directions and to return to the people we're meant to be and to the path we're meant to follow. So this morning, we're going to take up this idea of tshuva. Sherry, you've been teaching tshuva this week. Talk to us about what you've been teaching.
Well, I know, like you, Rabbi Feinstein, that leading up to the high holidays, it's like one teaching after another about tshuva, forgiveness, slichot, but there's one philosopher in particular that I really gravitate towards, Emmanuel Levinas, 20th century philosopher, I think died around 1995, Lithuanian Jew. Shout out to the Lithuanians because I did my ancestry and me, and I was 99.9% Ashkenazi Lithuanian Jew. So
Litvak all the way.
Yeah, I was so like, oh, maybe there's something else there, but not a drop. But Levinas was a mind that really looked at sort of the spirituality of Judaism. And he taught, something I love about him is that he taught for 30 years, even as he became a hugely successful philosopher and teacher. He taught for 30 years at a Paris high school on Saturday morning on Shabbat. There was something like he could really keep his feet deeply, firmly rooted in the ground, even as he went to these very elevated and lofty ideas, which I think is very rare because often we see that it's easy to live in the glass castle and think all these esoteric thoughts, but lose touch with humanity and the everyday. And I think pulpit rabbis especially are deeply in it, like yourself, like you're in it every day. And if you're not a pulpit rabbi, you have to really sort of stay in the mix of it. And he, as a philosopher, really understood that at a profound level. And so teaching high schoolers who are unabashed and unafraid to say like, I don't agree, that doesn't make sense, I'm not doing that, right? For 30 years, every Shabbos, as a result, I would just add that his pupils and his teachings were disseminated all around the world, because imagine all those high schoolers going out in the world and being influenced at that pivotal moment. So there's something very special about it. He wasn't a rabbi in the sense that we understand a rabbi in modern America, but there's a particular teaching of his around tshuva that I am so profoundly moved by. He says, we come to Elul, this month of preparation prior to the high holidays, ahor el ahor, literally back to back. Right? And then over the course of Elul and over the course of the holidays, we turn, literally shuv, until we are face to face, right? There's something so profoundly beautiful about that, because on one level, that during those 11 months, the assumption is we're also turning back to back. Something about that time period takes us externally focused as opposed to internally focused. And what we do during Elul and Tshuva is that we divert our eyes from the external and we turn them internal. So there's that just very surface level meeting. There's this other thing of like an acceptance that for 11 months, we are supposed to be externally focused, right? That is the state of being, that we are involved in the world. We're not ascetic living in a cave. We're not Shimon Bar Yochai condemning the world, right? We're in a cave. We're not that. We're in the world, looking externally, growing it, making it better, doing good in the world. But then there has to be sort of this turn where we consciously focus on coming face to face with one another. And let me add one more thing before we dive into it together, which is like, when you're back to back with someone, not only is there a lack of intimacy, but you can live with a lot of denial. Like if your back is to someone, you can be like, yeah, I don't have to look them in the face. But this idea of really being able to be panim, to really look at someone in the face is a level of vulnerability and courage that I think tshuva is asking us. And that's what I think makes tshuva so hard, right? Because that vulnerability, if you've become practiced for 11 months not doing it, then to suddenly say, okay, now you got to do it, is 1/12 of the time is hard. And so this conscious turning of tshuva as an act that is contradictory or against what our actual nature is what makes this time of year, I think, so precious, but also so daunting. So I wanted to start with that because
I love it. It's beautiful. It's a
it's
beautiful
so beautiful,
teaching.
right?
So there used to be a bookstore on our corner here, a Barnes and Noble bookstore, and I'm a sucker for bookstores. And I just like to peruse the shelves of bookstores. I can almost hear the conversation among authors who were sitting next to each other at the bookstore. So I was perusing a bookstore one night, and I see a title of a book. You ever see a title of a book? It just arrests your attention. Mm-hmm. So the title of it was a book by a wonderful Buddhist teacher. And the title of the book was, Wherever You Go, That's Where You Are. And I'm looking and I said, ooh, wherever you go, that's where you are. Wherever you go, that's where you are. And I stood there like people, my wife thought I was nuts because it's like meditating on this. Wherever you go, that's where you are. And then I realized and I bought the book because it's a wonderful book. But the truth of the matter is, it's not true. I mean, I've gone to lots of places and not shown up. I've been in lots of conversations and just not been there, right? Anyone who's married knows this, by the way, especially if you're married to a guy, because, you're talking to your husband, you're talking to your partner, and you said, did you just hear anything I said? Oh, yeah, of course, I heard it all. What did I say? It was about lettuce, just, that's the way that's the way my mind works, because I can be in front of somebody, but absolutely not present. Absolutely not present.
Well,
In
it's
fact,
so interesting.
Sometimes culture, especially now with phones, right? I mean, there's a whole question of an etiquette of, what happens when you're sitting talking to someone and their phone goes off and they insist on answering their phone or doing a text. No, keep talking to me. It's okay. So his idea that tshuva means turning to the other and really facing the other and hearing the voice, hearing what's said, hearing what's not said. Oh, that's so powerful. That's a beautiful talk.
But Eddie, you just added something even more beautiful. So you just added the imagery of one person has their back and the other one has their face.
Yeah.
Right. And this idea that you can think you're entirely present, but the other is not. Right. And I think we think, not to get so rabbinic, but I am a rabbi, I think we often feel that with God, right? We have our back to God and God's facing us, or vice versa. Mm. We're facing God, but we feel like God has God's back to us.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really interesting because there's a commentary that says that when Adam was created in the Garden of Eden, that God only created the front and not the back. And this idea that only Adam and God would be face to face, that was the only option. And it wasn't till later with Eve that the back was created. Mm. And I think a lot about God thinking to God's self, like, I don't want to face Adam if he's not paying attention.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I will only deal with you. So I'm not even going to give you the option. I mean, that's kind of what you imagine is the intention there.
And the most interesting thing, it's such a fruitful idea. The most interesting thing about this is you have to begin with your most intimate relationships.
Yes.
Right? like it's okay. I can pay attention to the clerk at the store for a few minutes, but I treat my partner as a piece of furniture. And when I counsel couples getting married, I warn them about this. You get so used to living with each other that you stop facing each other. You stop listening to each other. You become so used to each other's patterns. You can predict what your partner is going to say, so you don't even bother having the conversation.
Right,
So
you're just waiting to speak.
Yeah. So one of the steps is to really say, okay, what if we began this week as getting ready for Rosh Hashanah by really turning to the intimate partners of life and saying to them, how are you? I mean, who are you? Where are you in your life? Talk to me.
Well, it's interesting too, not to stretch this metaphor into its like farthest corner.
It's so fruitful. It's good.
But I think there is a difference between people that come to the high holidays with no preparation, and they're literally back to back, and they expect the high holiday service to suddenly turn them face to face, right? Like it's supposed to be like a magic wand. I always feel like, Harry Potter and his wands, I feel like their expectation is so unrealistic, right? And fortunately, our listeners have been turning all year. So you're not coming with this idea of expectation that it's supposed to turn you in one moment, but ask yourself, am I a person that has turned fully face to face, or am I partially turned, or am I in the process of turning, or am I despair that I don't want to turn anymore? Like there's a lot of iterations of this, like how far you go with it. I mean, I'm not gonna get cheesy, but how far you go with it is like, wow, like sometimes I turn towards certain things and certain people, and then I stop. Like I can't do it anymore. And maybe because I'm waiting for the other person to turn. And what does it mean if I can turn completely and they never turn? Right? Like there's all these different, right? And constellations, I would say.
One year before Yom Kippur, right before Kol Nidre, my wife Nina and I had some kind of conflagration, some kind of argument. I'm
you
sure
had an argument? The two of you had an argument?
Yeah, we're both rabbis, and imagine that, right?
Yeah, imagine.
We ate this dinner like in silence. The kids kept wondering like, what's with mom and dad? And I ran out of the house because I have to get to shul early and put on my garb and get ready for the holiday. And I come up to the bima, and my family and everyone else files into the synagogue. And I'm looking at my family there, and I'm saying to myself, I can't start this holiday this way. Mm. I can't start a holiday and ask God for atonement, for oneness, feeling this way with my wife still there, angry at me, and I'm angry at her, and we didn't hear each other, and we were yelling at each other. And I'm sure that we're not the only ones in the room, because it's such a pressured afternoon. You got to get dinner, and you got to get in the car and you have to get dressed and get in the car and get to the shul and find a damn parking place and get in the shul. And I'm sure everyone is feeling the same thing. And so I started talking, and I said, I can't start this way because I got too much in me. So I want to suggest something. Maybe you're in the same place I am. I want you to stand up. I had a whole congregation stand up, 1,000 people stand up. As I want you to turn to the people you're closest with here, and I want you to say you're sorry for the things you said and the things you didn't say and the things you should have said and the moments, the gestures that you should have made and the closeness we should have had. And I want you to say you're sorry. And I want you to become one with them before we can become one with God. And the most amazing thing happened was 1,000 people got up, 1,000 people turned to one another, and they began to cry. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I was ready to say, okay, go home. That's done. That's it. That's why we came today. Like that brokenness, the openness, the finally saying, like, what am I arguing with you for? I love you. What did we get? What was it that was so much more important than what we feel for each other? And they turned to each other, and everyone is in tears. And then I said, now we're ready. We took out the Torahs and we said Kol Nidre.
Right. It's so interesting. You brought up two things that I want to say. One is the holidays are rife and ripe for arguments.
Oh, gosh.
Right. First of all, it's known. And I used to hate the holidays as a kid because my father would yell at my mother, my brother, and I about what we wore. It was like such a thing about what we wore. And my brother was adamant about wearing ripped jeans, and I mean, it was just, and so it'd become a full-blown meltdown until we got into the car. And by the time we got to shul, we hated each other because it was over something so silly as clothing. I mean, don't look, I'm over it now. But I really go out of my way to make sure that, and then you've got all the pressure of getting the meals ready and all this stuff. So holidays are ripe for getting angry with each other because everything's so heightened. And I think they're also ripe for taking those extreme actions of asking for forgiveness, right? Like, and that's the piece I missed in my own childhood, but I very much capture in my adulthood. There's often many times that we're going to shul and I'm on the walk in the car saying something like, hey guys, I want to apologize for, and my kids are like, really, mom? Because, you know, they're preacher's kids. But then also this idea that it is a heightened time. And so the actions that we need to take have to be contrary to what we think we would normally take. They have to be amplified.
Yeah. Well, that's what ritual does. Ritual now forces us to do things that might not normally take place or would take place in their own rhythm. It forces the rhythm. I'm asking you to get up and turn to the person you love and tell them you're sorry. Now, if the rabbi tells you to do that, you got to do it. And then suddenly, as you're doing it, something broke open in front of me. I broke open for me. It broke open for so many people in the synagogue. It was just this moment.
So beautiful, Eddie. You know, when I was at
Remarkable.
Sinai, everybody faced each other during Al Hate, and we had people in pairs, and they had to face each other and look each other in the eyes. And the first year I did it, people could not stop giggling.
Yeah.
There was such a discomfort with that.
Yeah.
And the fact that people were able to do it and let it break down that, literally that veil or that glass that is just shattered by the words, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, holiday's done. Now we can go
That's
home.
exactly right. I felt that way. Like, okay, I did what I came to do. Let's daven Mariv and go home. I mean,
right. Let's have lunch.
Let's
right. Let's have a round hall and call it a night.
Let's have it tonight. Let's have it tonight. So let me propose a second rubric. The Levinas rubric is just beautiful. Thank you for that. So this is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit on Yom Kippur for those who'll be watching the service. This year, our community lost a very, very dear soul. We lost many, many souls, of course, but among them was a matriarch of our community, Malka Shulweiss. Malka wasn't just the rabbi's wife. Malka was a huge personality and had a huge role as a teacher of wisdom in our community. And I remember some years ago, I invited her to my men's group. I had a group of 100 guys that met for dinner 6 times a year to talk about issues that affect the lives of men. And then we had politicians and it had teachers and scholars. And Malka comes. This group of guys has a jovial night, eating a lovely meal, drinking a little beer or some wine. And this little lady who looks like everybody's bubby, everybody's grandma, gets up and all the guys get quiet. And she says one line. She says, gentlemen, if you don't live on purpose, you live by accident. And all of a sudden, there was this silence in the room because it felt like truth had just fallen into the room, had fallen from the ceiling. And then she began talking about many people, most of us actually, live by accident. We let life tell us what to do. We float along. We don't make deliberate choices. We don't reflect or examine our values and ask ourselves, are we living the lives we're meant to be living? Are we living the lives we want to be living? Are we living our aspirations? Most of us just let life move us forward. And it was one of the most profound nights I have ever seen in any place, in a synagogue, because this group of men got terribly serious with her. And she just talked in this most gentle way because she could get through to us in this way of saying, guys, if you don't make choices deliberately, reflectively, carefully, then you're going to reach a point in midlife when you discover that you've missed it all, that you've missed the life you should have been living. And I don't want you to get to that point. So one of the things I think about this year, particularly with tshuva, is I don't want to be living randomly. I want to be living deliberately. I want to be living intentionally. I want to be living on purpose. We spent time I spend time with friends, and they may even be watching. So I love them so very dearly. And I watch the way that they conduct their lives, and they're very deliberate about the balance they put into their lives, the calmness that they embrace. I love the way that, you know, it's ironic to me, of course, you know, people will spend a great deal of time, you know, decorating their homes, but not a great deal of time decorating their lives, you know, and I love it when I see a person who's made choices. You've done this so beautifully. You've told us about so many of the things that you do, the letters you write on Friday afternoon, and the things you talk about with your kids. And I'm so jealous, you know, because that deliberation takes energy, it takes strength, it takes work. It's awkward at first. The first 20 times you do it, it's weird. And yet slowly, that becomes who you are and what you are. So I want people to reflect on life this year. And I want us to ask ourselves, am I living deliberately? Am I living on purpose? Am I living reflectively? Am I living by examining what I am? Am I living my aspirations? That's really the question for me of tshuva today.
It's so beautiful, Eddie, because I think my mother used to say, don't be a bystander to your life.
Yeah.
Which is the same idea. And she also was very close to Malka. So probably she was influenced by her wisdom. But this idea that you proactively and deliberately live, to me, is sort of core at how I choose to live each day. And not in a crazy way, but I don't want life to happen to me. I don't want to be a bystander. And I see that with a lot of people that come in, they're like, if I don't make a decision, then the decision will just happen. And it's like, really? That's the plan? Right? The plan is
it'll be made for me. Right?
Yes, it'll be made for me. But like, really, you're a 55-year-old adult. You really want someone else to make the decision for you? But I think there is a sense of doom and fear of making the wrong decision and also having to take responsibility.
Yeah.
And we have so many responsibilities in our life, to add on another one feels like too much. People often say to me, I just can't take on another responsibility, and this decision would force me to take it on.
Right.
And I think to myself, what choice do we have? We can be a bystander, or we can be, as they say, an
Not
upstander.
deciding is also a decision.
Correct.
Right.
And I don't think it's either. I don't think it's binary. It's not an upstander or bystander. I think there's something in the middle, but it's being deliberate, like you said.
The brutal truth of Maimonides' teaching, and this is in his book Hilchos Tshuva, the Laws of Tshuva, which is a guide to the whole process of tshuva. But because Maimonides is like the most brutally truthful rabbi who ever lived.
So true.
And when he says, you are the accumulation of your choices, and you cannot blame any outside force or any determinate force for making you who and what you are. You are what you are because you've chosen this pattern, this habit, this way of living, and you are responsible for it. On the one hand, it's a deeply liberating teaching because he says you're always free to change your mind. Remember Viktor Frankl, who says you're all, even in the worst of circumstances, you're free to interpret the circumstances you're living in. And then Maimonides comes and says, well, not just that you're interpreting them, but you make decisions about what you're going to do next, and you own those decisions. And it's brutally true, and it's brutally difficult to know that I have that freedom, and at the same time that I'm responsible for that. And it's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable choice.
All too often, I think it's easy to fall prey to that victimhood, to that story that things are happening to me.
Right.
And it's, you're doing this to me, and it's personal, right? It's so easy, whether it's at work or at home, especially with the people closest to us, right? We think, you did this to me, and I'm a victim in this story, right? And I talk a lot with people about, how do I change my narrative? How do I take myself out as the victim?
Yeah.
And I think Maimonides is saying, not only take yourself out as the victim, but see that as the joy of freedom.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing I was going to say is that people often think they have two choices. Really, we often have many choices. We just don't always like the potential consequences of them. So we eliminate them before we make them a choice.
Right.
Right. So we often have way more choices than we think we have.
And the anger that comes with victimhood becomes a drug.
Correct.
Because I mean, another soul we lost this year, Lahavdil, is Jackie Mason, the comedian, the rabbi who was a comedian. And the funny thing about Jackie Mason is he embodies that sort of rage at what you did to me, right? Of what the world did to me, and all the bitterness of the person who says, I could have been somebody except for what you did to me and what this happened to me. And the humor of it is we recognize how silly it is. That instead of becoming the subject of your story, you became its object. And think of the image from the movie Forrest Gump.
Oh,
The
yeah.
movie begins and ends with this picture of a feather being blown along. You know, this feather being blown along. And you think of a life as a feather being blown along the winds of life, and never stopping to make a deliberate choice and saying, I want to stand for something. I want to protect something. I want to cultivate something. I want to, I want to have a certain kind of relationship with those around me. I want to cultivate it. How to work at it. It's work. It's work, and it demands a great deal of us.
I just have to touch on that movie for a second because it's such a brilliant movie, but the other part of it is always running away, right? The imagery is, the metaphor is that he's always running.
He's a runner, right?
He's a runner, he's running.
Mhm.
And when you're not the subject of your narrative, you're trying to run from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Yontif comes, the holiday comes and says, what would it be like to write your own story? I mean, Abraham Heschel, the beautiful philosopher, in his last interview, the last question of the interview, Carl Stern from NBC News asks him, what's your message to the children of America, to the young people of America? This was in 1972 when the world was going crazy. And he said, consider your life a piece of art and make it your masterpiece. And if you think about the deliberation of an artist, artist starts with a blank canvas. Every color, every design, every line, every contour is created by the artist. Your life is a piece of art. Create a piece of art. Make your life into a piece of art, and then be proud of it. And then be proud of it. And today we're being asked, you can make a correction. All the great artists made corrections. I didn't like this. I'm going to make a better one. And that's what Tshuva comes to ask us to do. Sherry, thank you for spending Shabbos with me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I love it, Eddie.
Shana Tova. And
Shana
for everyone,
Tova to
tonight
you.
is the Slichot, the celebration of Slichot. Valley Beth Shalom will begin at 7:30 here at the synagogue and and online. And our guest, Jonathan Bar-Or, Counsel for Public Diplomacy for the State of Israel here in Los Angeles. And then we'll be praying together. But whatever synagogue you're attached to, please connect with their Slichot. As well, I know the National Rabbinical Assembly has a national Slichot celebration tonight, a chance to learn with some of the great rabbis of North America and Israel and Europe. So thank you for being. I wish everyone a Shana Tova. We will be on next week, right?
Yeah.
Because it's holiday time, and we'll be celebrating just as we're getting ready for the holiday. And so I wish everyone Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.